This week, a Boston couple vacationing miles from home happen upon a very special stray dog and offer her sanctuary and love.
She was kind of scruffy looking, but she'd get to your heart quick.
But 6 years later, all of their lives would lie in mortal danger.
My first thought when I opened up the door was total panic because of what I saw, just a house full of smoke.
Two young horses show their owners an extraordinary bond of affection.
Toby was very possessive. He figured that she was his girlfriend.
After he'd finished eating, if the door was open, he'd always go and stand and have an eye on Mara in her stall. He was always there, rain or shine, he'd make sure Mara was in there.
But tragedy would reveal a remarkable story of intelligence and spirit. And later, a young mother sets out with her two small children and the family cat on a cross-country move to begin a new life in a new city. But as night falls and the miles wear on, only a miracle can keep them from harm's way.
I was falling asleep at the wheel.
Have you ever had a stray dog follow you home and you wondered if you should keep it? Well, our next story is about a couple who decide to keep that little stray, and it turned out to be the luckiest thing they ever did. Larry Curran doesn't use his motorhome as much as he would like to anymore, not since his wife developed Alzheimer's. But this holiday getaway holds the memories of a lifetime for Larry and his dog, Jonathan. It all began in a campground on the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia, where they first met a scruffy little terrier they called Jessie.
I was having a cup of coffee with my wife one day, and I said, "You gotta look out the window." Jonathan was running across the field, and Jessie had him by the tail, and Jonathan was dragging her. From that time on, I think John really adopted her.
The two dogs were inseparable, except when Jessie was out scrounging for food, wherever she could find it.
Everybody was trying to get everybody else to take her home. At night, she would come over and she'd sleep underneath the back of my motorhome, up against the back tires. I'd go out and all I could see was two big white circles in her eyes. And she was a sweetheart.
As the summer days grew shorter, Larry grew concerned.
It was like after Labor Day, and pretty much everybody was going back home. That if she was going to wind up being left by herself. And I know I kept telling people, "You ought to take her home, she's a beautiful dog." And they said, "Why don't you take her home?" I said, "I already have a dog."
The time came for the Currans to head home, leaving Jessie behind to fend for herself.
You could tell Jonathan wasn't happy, my wife wasn't happy, and I wasn't happy.
With everyone so miserable, there was only one thing to do: return to the campground and find Jessie.
And I knelt down and I said, "Jessie, what's the matter?" She put her head down. I handed it to Irene, this friend that we had met. I said, "Give her a kiss because she's going to Boston."
At the Currans' home in Boston, Jessie finally got what she needed: a lot of tender, loving care.
When my wife took her to the vets, when we first got home, she was loaded with infection. And the vet said if we hadn't brought her home, she'd have been dead in about a week.
Jessie got stronger and soon proved that, although scruffy, she had personality to burn.
She was the type of an animal that if you saw her and you saw my other dog, Jonathan, the first thing you'd want to do was go pat Jonathan. They'd look at Jessie and they'd say, oh, I guess we better pat her too. And once they put a hand on her, they'd say, what a great dog. Because she was kind of scruffy looking, but she'd get to your heart quick. And Jessie was just a different kind of an animal. Jessie understood what was going on in the household at all times.
One night, 6 years after they brought her home, Larry woke to Jessie barking at the bedroom door.
Jessie. Jessie, go lay down.
Larry called to her to quiet down, but a minute later she was back at the closed door, barking even louder.
My first thought when I opened up the door was total panic because of what I saw. You know, just a house full of smoke. It's scary. I don't know whether you got a fire or what. The three smoke detectors were blaring, but none of us heard it. Jonathan was laying out in the back hall underneath the layer of smoke, and he was letting her take care of things.
Larry immediately called the fire department before investigating further.
Fire, yes, fire department, please.
I could tell it was coming from the cellar because I could see the smoke coming out from under the door, and I didn't open the door. I just figured I better get out of here.
By the time the fire department arrived, only 5 minutes later, the entire house was consumed in thick, oily smoke.
I think if Jessie hadn't barked, I think we would have been some sick people. You know, carbon monoxide poisoning, I think we'd all been in trouble.
For her role in saving the family, the Boston SPCA awarded Jessie the Animal Hero Award for 1998.
The way I felt about it was that I just felt that we had a very special animal. We helped her in a time of her life when she was in trouble, and she helped us in a time of her life when we were in trouble.
For the next 3 years, Jessie continued her vigilant watch over her family. When Larry's wife Ginger returned home after surgery for a broken hip, Jessie was especially attentive.
And when she came home, there was things that she couldn't do. She basically, you know, really needed somebody by her side. One day, I was working on my computer upstairs, and Jessie came to the bottom of the stairs and started to cry, and bark and cry and bark. And I'm saying, I couldn't figure out what was going on, but I knew that there was something amiss. I came downstairs, my wife was preparing to take a shower, which Jessie knew that she could not do by herself. I was totally amazed that Jessie had sensed this and was giving me the signal that something's up and you better get here quick.
Sadly, while Ginger was still recovering from her broken hip, she was diagnosed with the early stages of Alzheimer's.
Jessie was very in tune with the fact that my wife was having a problem with comprehension, and any time that Jessie sensed any kind of danger, she'd come to me and let me know that something was going on that I should again be aware of. And she just had an amazing feeling for what my wife was going through. And she followed her around, and she was her guardian angel.
When Ginger went to live in a special facility for people with Alzheimer's, she left an immense hole in the lives of Larry and their dogs. When Larry went out of town, the dogs were boarded at a kennel.
The night that I came home, I found out that Jessie passed away then early in the morning, and I was destroyed. Bad. It's like I lost my best friend. And I saw Jessie, gave her a hug, told her to save a place in heaven for us. Jonathan didn't want to leave. And I looked at him and I said, it's just you and me, buddy. God sent Jessie here to help us. And I believe that. And she did. I think she just got to the point where she thought her job was done. But we'll see her again. You take a lot of things for granted in life, but there's some special things in your life, and we were blessed.
Coming up next, two horses display a special friendship, but a freak accident would send one into peril and the other into action. With veterinary care hours away, hope is fading fast.
First I thought she was dead, you know, because she was just laying there.
And later, a lifelong dog lover is moved to adopt a tiny kitten in need of love and affection. But when tragedy strikes a few years later, the favor would be returned in this incredible story of two perfect companions. Stay tuned for more miraculous stories.
Friendship between animals is a wondrous thing. We don't know what language they speak to express compassion, but we have seen through their behavior time and time again that their feelings for one another are lasting and profound. Life's a little lonelier for Tim and Penny Hives these days. It seems empty in their little corner of heaven in North Saanich on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. Penny remembers back to over 25 years ago when Toby and Mara first trotted together across the fields.
Toby was a thoroughbred we bought from the racetrack, and he was quite flighty and highly strung, I would say. Mara was, as a young horse, was very curious. She would follow us around the field, and if Tim was digging post holes, she'd look over his shoulder or put her head in the hole to see what was going on. She was a very affectionate horse.
Mara was 8 when 3-year-old Toby joined the family. Right away, they stood out from the rest of their herd. But what really set them apart was the special connection that they seemed to share with each other.
Well, they had a little bit more character than some of the other horses we had. Toby would always call to me in the morning. I'd go out to feed him, and he would always call. And Mara would call too. They're quite social animals, and they need a buddy. And this is what they were. They were really pals and buddies together.
I've always loved horses. I had a pony when I was 11, and Tim had a horse when he was young. They're like part of our family. I mean, you're responsible for your animals, and we loved them. And I like to think that they loved us. Toby was very possessive. He figured that she was his girlfriend, and she didn't seem to be bothered too much by it.
Mara, she'd always stay in her stone and eat, but Toby, after he'd finished eating, if the door was open, he'd always go and stand and have an eye on Mara in her stall. He was always there, rain or shine, and make sure Mara was in there.
And the closeness between Toby and Mara was never more evident than one day when Tim was doing some repair work around the house.
I was working on the garage roof, and it was after lunch, and Toby was running around his paddock outside and calling and making an awful fuss, more noise than he usually did.
Toby often called for Mara, hoping she would come, but this sound was definitely different. It was a very frantic sound, a scream. And he was just galloping around and up and down and making a big fuss.
Up on the ladder, Tim finally took notice of Toby's plaintive calls.
I kind of ignored it for maybe a minute or two, but he kept it up and was really getting quite anxious, so I went down to see what was wrong, and he was still running around and calling, so I thought, wow, it must be Mars somewhere, I guess, and he can't find her.
By this time, Tim and Penny knew that something was terribly wrong. Where was Mara? Toby was now extremely restless and galloping wildly about. Even a lifetime working with horses hadn't prepared Tim and Penny for what they saw next.
Mara had somehow fallen off the bridge and landed in the stream bed, which was about 8 feet down.
And there she was, lying at the bottom of a ravine, and she wasn't moving.
First I thought she was dead, you know, because she was just laying there. So I scrambled down there, could see she was still breathing, but she didn't seem to be making any effort to get up.
Tim didn't know how long Mara had been there, but he knew that every minute she lay there without moving was a minute closer to death. He ran to call 911 and Patricia Food, their veterinarian and close family friend.
I was driving down the road on my regular rounds, my pager went off, and it was Mr. Hive saying that Mara was in the ditch. So I immediately stopped the truck, phoned the Hiveses, told them I was on my way.
As Pat raced to the farm, the fire department had already arrived. They were prepared to deal with many kinds of crises, but nothing quite like this. They knew that her condition was serious. As Tim was deciding what to do next, Pat arrived on scene.
I knew that she'd been down for at least half an hour, probably an hour. And any horse, no matter what the problem is, if they've been lying down for that length of time, you get worried about their muscles, you get worried about their ability to breathe.
But that's not all that Pat was worried about.
I thought she had a broken leg. I was convinced that we were going to have to put her down, because most horses are going to be able to get up if they can get up.
Toby, watching from the fenced-in pasture, stared in the direction of his stricken friend, Mara. And just as Pat reached to check Mara's legs, something inexplicable happened.
I bent down to reach the lower leg, the one that she was lying on, to see how much of it I could feel. And as I bent over, her head came up, she looked at me, her body moved back and forth, back and forth. She scrambled up and ran up that pathway.
Everyone watched in astonishment as Mara galloped away towards her savior and best friend, Toby.
It was just amazing. And she wasn't seriously injured.
I just cleaned up the few little scratches she had on her and put her back in her paddock, and she and Toby immediately ran to the back of the paddock and just stood and talked to each other, as if to say, what the heck just happened? They're just amazing. I think Toby knew what had happened, and he was just making sure that she was okay in his own way. And she was telling him that she was okay. It was a miracle that this horse, at her age, given where she fell and how long she'd been down, that she survived, and survived to have a good year.
Although it will always be a mystery to Tim and Penny just how Mara survived the fall into the ravine that morning, one thing they do know: it was Toby's affection for Mara that created a true miracle that day.
After the break, canine companions Shiloh and Stakaya are the picture of light-hearted playfulness and mischievous to a fault.
Stakaya's always been a bit of a problem. She's a escape artist.
But one day, their freewheeling adventures would lead to terrible consequences.
If they weren't always together, Stakaya would be dead today. There's no doubt about it.
Stay tuned for a remarkable story of friendship and endurance. But first, one woman's profound love for her longtime companion torn apart by a vicious and callous crime.
Stars come in all shapes and sizes. There are falling stars, movie stars, and our next star, a little cat. A cat named Night Star, who is smart enough to know that where there's smoke, there's fire. Ghislaine Labonte always loved dogs. But her new apartment was too small for a dog, so she decided a cat would have to do. She finally found a pretty male kitten that she liked, but a little female, the runt of the litter, seemed to beg to be taken home.
But the little rascal. She looked at me and then she came over. She seemed to like me best, so I took her home. I had to teach her how to eat. She just left her mother, so I made a puree to wean her. So I became her mommy for a while.
The kitten had a small white starburst on her neck, and after her plaintive cries kept Ghislaine awake the first night, she found the perfect name for her, Étoile de Nuit, night star in French. Étoile de Nuit was an independent, aloof cat. She spent most of her time outside, coming in only to eat and sleep.
I usually go to bed around 10:30. Étoile was often still outside at that time. She'd come in through the bedroom window where the screen is a little torn away. That way, she could come and go as she pleased.
But on June 14, 1998, Ghislaine discovered that Étoile de Nuit cared for her a lot more than she ever knew. That evening, Ghislaine decided to go to bed early. She had planned to go shopping with her mother the next day and wanted to be well rested. Étoile de Nuit curled up in her own special bed. Ghislaine was extremely tired and before long was in a deep, deep sleep. At about 6:30 in the morning, Ghislaine woke to the sounds of Étoile de Nuit's loud cries.
My cat was on the bed and she was jumping around hysterically, meowing frantically. I was in such a deep sleep, probably because of the smoke. It was as if I was hearing her in a dream. I pushed her off the bed and I told her to be quiet. It was too early to get up.
As thick smoke began to curl under the door and into her room, Étoile de Nuit became more and more agitated. Again, Ghislaine pushed her off the bed, convinced the cat just wanted to sleep with her. Now surrounded by intense smoke and heat, Étoile de Nuit was becoming more and more desperate.
Finally, to make me understand there was something urgent, she scratched me across the cheek, and that woke me up.
Ghislaine got up. Étoile de Nuit rubbed frantically against Ghislaine's legs, but muscular dystrophy had robbed Ghislaine of some feeling in her legs.
I thought she wanted to go out. Étoile was meowing frantically, something I'd never seen her do before. Her window was open, but she was so insistent, I went to the door with her.
As Ghislaine turned around to return to bed, she suddenly saw the reason for her cat's strange behavior.
Then I saw my bedroom. One wall and the ceiling were on fire, and I could see smoke rising.
Ghislaine ran across the street to a neighbor's, who quickly called the fire department. The firemen assured her there was no one in her house.
That's when I realized I could have died in the flames. It's almost impossible to describe an experience like that. Sometimes we think we're invincible, but you can never ever tell when something like this is going to happen to you.
In less than 2 hours, there was nothing but ashes. Ghislaine, her material possessions lost in the smoldering ruin, suddenly realized Étoile de Nuit was nowhere to be found.
I was completely distraught. I could only think of one thing. I had to find Étoile, but she was nowhere to be found.
Then Ghislaine received more disturbing news. The fire that could have cost her her life had been deliberately set. Losing her home was bad enough, but to lose her friend was worse. Ghislaine said a silent prayer for the little cat's return. And finally, 12 hours later, Ghislaine's prayers were answered.
I went back to my burned out house and called her name. And then it was like a miracle. I heard her calling out to me.
Hey, toile de nuit.
She was terrified. She was burnt and her hair was coming out by the handful. She was in a state of shock.
For the next 2 months, Ghislaine was plagued by nightmares. But Étoile de Nuit was always there to comfort her.
When I would wake up at night, shaking, she would come to sleep with me. She'd purr just like a little motor until I calmed down.
Ghislaine's loss was a tragedy, but it brought with it an unexpected blessing.
Étoile eventually got better, and she showed me that if she could overcome her hardship, then I could overcome mine. I had to be strong after all she'd done for me.
And now, although she still loves dogs, she reserves the most special place in her heart for cats, especially her Étoile de Nuit, her night star. Étoile de Nuit's efforts did not go unnoticed. She's been awarded a medal from the Quebec Academy of Veterinarian Doctors and has entered the Cat Hall of Fame. But the attention hasn't gone to Étoile de Nuit's head. She's become a real homebody. These days, she hardly ever leaves Ghislaine's side.
Étoile is a courageous cat. She stayed in the smoke and the flames to save me. She could have left by the open window at any time, but she didn't. I didn't realize it at the time, but now I know I owe my life to Étoile de Nuit.
Still to come, desperately trapped in an abandoned well, one dog must rely on the ingenuity and resourcefulness of her best friend to summon help.
I saw a dog going back and forth, pacing around something. I always had dogs before, and the way that dog was doing things, I knew there was something. That dog was trying to talk to me.
And in the chaos and stress of a cross-country road trip, for the Emery family, Patricia, the family cat, is a calm and stable influence.
She takes care of the family and makes sure everybody's okay.
She sort of knows exactly when the mood switches. And it's almost to remind you, like, everything's okay, or I'm here for you.
But soon, their lives could rest in these tiny paws.
Even the most innocent adventure occasionally goes awry. When one of our next four-footed vagabonds finds himself in deep trouble, it's up to his friend to summon help. Shiloh and Stakaya are inseparable pals. Wherever one goes, the other is sure to follow. Shiloh is a 2-year-old Border Collie cross. Her faithful friend is Stakaya, an 11-year-old Wolf Husky cross. Don't let the ages fool you. It's the 2-year-old Shiloh that's more sensible, content to play around the backyard of Lisa Riley's home on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It's Stakaya who never rests. Half wolf, she's a victim of the wanderlust in her breeding.
Stakaya's always been a bit of a problem. She's an escape artist. She's got that wolf instinct in her, and she wants to go, she goes.
Lisa thought a double latch would be enough to finally keep Stakaya at home. But one Mother's Day, someone forgot to close both latches. Stakaya didn't take long to make a run for freedom.
When the latch was off the bottom there, she just squeezed her way out, and off she goes. Shiloh, of course, has to go and keep her company.
There was one thing that Stakaya loved as much as running free: water. It almost turned out to be a deadly combination. Approaching an abandoned sinkhole, half filled with water, she took one look and then jumped. Stakaya had leapt into an abandoned well. It was about 2 meters deep, half filled by murky water, and one life-saving piece of wood onto which she literally clung to life. Back home, the Rileys were celebrating Mother's Day, unaware of the tragedy confronting the family pets.
Usually, if we don't find them ourselves, they'll come back in about an hour or so, usually all wet and muddy and haven't had a lot of fun.
Every minute was critical for Stakaya. She was starting to weaken in the cold water. Sensing Stakaya was in trouble, Shiloh ran for help. Claude Lavoie lived across the highway from the water hole where Stakaya was trapped.
I saw a dog going back and forth, pacing around something. So I just called up the dog and I said, "Go home." So instead of going home, that dog turned around and kind of looked at me, wiggling the tail. And I repeated the same thing twice or three times. I said, "Go home, go home." But no way.
There was something in Shiloh's behavior that Claude immediately recognized.
I had always had dogs before, and the way that dog was doing things, I knew there was something. That dog was trying to talk to me, So that's why, I realized, that hole.
Claude followed Shiloh through the thick brush to the abandoned well. There he saw Stakaya fighting for her life.
She was doomed down there. There's no way she could make it up. There was a piece of wood floating there, and he would hold to the piece of wood for maybe 15, 20 seconds and then fall off again. I gave the dog, a few words of encouragement and some support, trying to tell him I would be back. I needed help. I couldn't do nothing alone.
Claude returned home and called the SPCA.
So we were getting kind of worried that they hadn't showed up on their own. We checked all through over and over again for a couple hours, and there still was no sign of them.
Natalie Prevot, the local SPCA officer, was enjoying a Sunday at home when an emergency call came in from the answering service.
I told her to put the filler through when she said it was an emergency about a dog. Sometimes the dogs are vicious. When they're scared, they'll bite anybody that comes near them. I said, don't go near the dog, leave the situation, and I will be right there to assist you.
Claude prepared a ladder and returned to the side of the road and waited for Natalie.
When I arrived there, Claude was waiting for me on the highway with Border Collie. Border Collie just led us right to the other dog.
Natalie prepared to climb down into the hole as Stakaya desperately tried to keep her head above water.
I climbed down and calmed the dog down and put a rope around his chest underneath the water.
After more than an hour in the cold, dirty water, Stakaya was pulled out to safety.
He would have died for sure. I mean, he wouldn't have lived in there, there's no way, and there's no way he would have got out himself.
Hello? Yeah, I'd like to report a couple of dogs missing in the Briardale.
Lisa had given up the search for the lost dogs. The SPCA was her last hope.
Finally, we called the SPCA, and that was a bit scary because it was the answering service since they weren't open that day. And us being close to the highway, we thought, she'd been hit by a car.
But soon the dogs were reunited with Lisa, who was told of the misadventure. And she was just a little surprised at Shiloh's miraculous behavior.
She is very smart. It's still amazing, though, that she would know what to do. 'Cause I would have thought she would just stay right with Stakaya and just not know what to do, but she went out and got some help. If they weren't always together, Stakaya would be dead today. There's no doubt about it.
As for Stakaya, even though she's partly wild, she was civilized enough to thank Claude.
Big eyes looking at me like, thank you very much for what you did, you know, kind of surprised, you know. And that was my reward. That was enough for me, you know.
Stakaya's near brush with tragedy ended well, thanks to Shiloh, Claude, and Natalie, heroes of a Mother's Day to remember.
It was about the best Mother's Day present I could have gotten that day.
With her 2 small children and the family cat sleeping peacefully, a young mother struggles to stay awake at the wheel. When we return.
We all know that dogs love cars. They love to put their heads out the window, breathe in that fresh air, but cats, well, that's a different story. They don't seem to have the same passion for travel. In our next story, however, we'll meet someone who's more than happy that a cat came along for the ride. Most cats dislike cars almost as much as they dislike mice or birds. Not Patricia. She loves traveling, making herself right at home in the backseat of the Emery family van.
She's an excellent traveler. Even today, she travels very well. She never bothered anybody. She was happy to, you know, lie down.
When the Emery family packed up to move back to the west coast of Canada, Mother Garija decided to travel ahead by car with the boys, while her husband and daughters would fly out later.
I've been from coast to coast, and I wanted the kids to kind of see a little bit more, so I am always, you know, going ahead of the moving truck and just basically enjoying the countryside.
There was never any question that Patricia would accompany Garija and the boys on their adventure.
The cat, as I found, was just remarkable in terms of a traveler, because it's unusual that a cat would stop and meow in the back of the seat, and I had instinctively knew that she was, you know, concerned and needed to do her duty, and I would stop the car, and the first time it was actually quite miraculous. So she just jumped out, she kind of just dug a little hole and did her duty, and then sort of jumped back in the car, and I was thinking, this is perfect. I mean, I don't have to worry or get, you know, all the necessary pans and kitty litter and what have you. And so she was very cooperative, which was quite nice.
Taking a cat on a long drive with a carload of energetic kids could spell extra stress. But if anything, Patricia always lent an air of calm to things. She always seemed to know if someone needed a little special attention.
She takes care of the family and makes sure everybody's okay. I've always loved her. She's a great cat.
She sort of knows exactly when the mood switches. And it's almost to remind you, like, everything's okay, or I'm here for you. So she's, you know, she's got some intuition happening there, for sure.
To help burn off the kids' endless energy, Garija got in the habit of stopping during the day to let the children play.
I got in the habit of taking my time in the day and then driving at night.
As they slowly crossed the vast expanse of northern Ontario, the Emerys settled into their daily routine of afternoon breaks and long nighttime drives.
I love driving at night. It's just a time to be quiet, and especially when you're stopping all day and kids are playing, and it's a time to just sort of reflect in the day and be peaceful.
3 days into a week-long drive to the west coast, Garija was pleased with the time she was making, but by midnight, she needed a cup of coffee. It would help get her to the next town, which was still 2 hours away.
I know when I need a cup of coffee, it's because I'm getting tired. There was a little roadside cafe that I stopped in and grabbed a cup of coffee, usually straight. You know, I don't want it diluted because it's almost like medicinal. Okay, that's going to keep me awake. There's just so many miles up there of just, you know, dark, lonely roads.
As the miles flew by, Patricia and the boys were fast asleep in the back seat.
So I'm putting on a few extra miles, so the kids and the cat, everybody's very quiet. You know, everything's peaceful, basically. I was feeling tired, I knew that. And you're just sort of pushing your limits a little bit. And I knew that I would be pulling over soon enough, just for the night and get a hotel in the next little town.
Despite the coffee, the long, dark road and the steady drone of the motor was beginning to have a hypnotic effect.
It's such a quick thing, and you don't even realize that it's happening. And so, obviously, that's what was happening to me. I was falling asleep at the wheel.
As Garija began to lose control of the van, she was suddenly snapped awake.
The cat jumps onto my lap as I'm actually driving and just meows quite loudly. And in a split second, I'm alerted by all of this.
As she looked up, she saw lights coming directly towards her.
In front of me are two, huge headlights of this semi-trailer truck that's just barreling down my side of the road. And I just have enough time. I just yank the steering wheel over to the right to just get out of the way.
Badly shaken, Garija looked and saw that the boys were still sleeping peacefully. Patricia moved back and curled up with them.
How did you know I was falling asleep? How did you know any of it? It is a miracle. As far as I'm concerned, it's an act of something that's beyond our understanding and our grasp. It's just too uncanny, and one has to really reflect. Like, I think about it all the time.
A little love and petting was all the reward Patricia wanted for rescuing the family from disaster. She was content to settle back in her place for the rest of the journey.
There's no doubt in my mind that if Patricia hadn't jumped into my lap that night, that we wouldn't be here today to tell the story. She definitely saved our lives.
Well, that's our show, but we'll be back soon with more true stories about animal miracles. Until then, please be kind to animals. They deserve it, and they do enrich our lives in so many miraculous and wonderful ways. I'm Alan Thicke, and we'll see you next time, right?